So this is how I'm wrapping my conveyor belt around my idler wheel right here. Basically, I'm just choosing an arbitrary point on the wheel to start out. I start out with one hole, just drill it out, and then what I'll do is I'll use these countersunk machine screws with lock nuts. So that's how I'll start out, and choose a point too that's not where your seam is for your steel. As you can see, my seam's over here. So that's something to look out for. And what I'll do is I'll just basically wrap this guy all around. So this is what I'm kind of doing here. I'll probably do about 8 sets of screws. And basically I just drill through the conveyor, steel banding, and then the wheel rim. That's basically it. Alright, the idler wheels are now rimmed with conveyor belt rubber. These aren't perfect by any means. I mean, you can tell I got some gaps here and there, but to be honest, these little number 10 screws will hold up just fine because you're going to get a lot of compression on this conveyor belt, so it'll stick pretty good. Remember, this is just to keep the ice and snow from sticking, and then also a longer wear life on the track itself. Alright, so today I'm going to be working on the idler tensioner assembly. Basically, it's a Russian-inspired rigid axle tensioner. So basically I'm going to have a tube here, another tube here, and all it really does, it just slips into this hole right here. And I just back it off until it's flush with this 2x2 tube right here, the cross tubes for our axle. What I'll do is I'll weld those in place, make sure that they're nice and parallel. And I got my other components here. This is the actual all thread for the screw tensioner, the main cross beam that goes between the 2 posts right there, and then you got the stubs as well as the actual clamping plates right here. And I got the nuts that I'll weld onto the cross tube, and then I got gussets that'll help strengthen up the stubs. Alright, I got my idler tensioner tubes tacked on, nice and parallel. I'm off about roughly a 1/16 on each side, so it's an 1/8 inch total. But the nice thing is on my tensioner slides, I got about 1/16 of slop on each side too, so that kind of evens out there. Nothing super precise. So what I'll do now is I'll just fully weld this stuff together, get it all boxed in and nice and watertight. You gotta excuse the poor lighting here, but I did finish up welding, or at least fully welding up the tubes. I'm gonna leave this seam just tack welded for now until I get my upper superstructure on, just so I can flex it a bit. But anyways, I'm gonna continue on and start welding up the little tensioner assemblies here. Basically, I'm gonna use these little fixture magnets to get my 90 degrees. One thing I noticed too, when these got cut out in the plasma, is you can see that my slot and tab didn't really slot out very well because it was so thin towards the actual outer material. So that's something I'll probably have to change later on, give it some more meat from a width standpoint. So yep, basically we're just building a little box here. This one will go on that side, and then this will go on top of that. Got my tensioner idler box assembly all tacked up. Really nothing fancy. These are where our weld nuts will go to help clamp it down once you got it to the adjusted position. But basically this thing just slides back and forth on this tube here. There'll be another one on that side, and it'll be bridged by that square tubing, and then there'll be 2 lead screws that will push off the main frame here. Pretty ingenious idea from the Russians. Anywho, so I'm going to be putting my main cross tube now. I'm going to be welding it onto my slider assemblies. Basically what I did is I just took what the tube I have cut up now, which is 42 inches in length, and I subtracted it from the length that is now on the machine itself. And I divided by 2, giving me a 5 7/16 distance. So I measured each side, move this towards the light, 5 7/16 and 5 7/16. Alright, the cross tube has been cut. It fits in pretty good. So what I'll do now is I'll just slip it in here, and then I'll tack weld each side, making sure it's nice and plumb in center. And basically, once I verify that it slides correctly, I'll fully weld it up. Alright, I got my tube stubs cut and tack welded to my slider assembly here. Basically, all I did is I just eyeballed the idler. That's really all you got to do. I mean, if you want to be German precise or something, you can go ahead and do that, but this is good enough for me. This is just redneck engineering, I guess you call it. But anyways, I got this baby all lined up pretty good. Same thing on the other side. Well, you can't really see on this because it's the dark side of the machine. But anyways, I got my spindle in here. I'll just tack it in, and then I'll pop the whole entire assembly out, and I'll be good to go. But for the most part, I really got to air up that tire. But it's looking pretty good. So I got the major assembly pretty much fully welded. I'm still looking at this guy. It looks a little spindly for an idler. I think in the future what I'll do is I'll turn into maybe 3x2, or hell, even maybe 2x4 rectangular tubing. But for now, what I'll do is I'll just add a gusset on each side, 3/8 gusset, and see how that goes. If it starts bending, basically all I can do is just add more steel. So, alright, gussets are fully welded, ready to go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my clamping weld nuts here. Basically, they're just, looks like they're 4 projection piloted weld nuts right here. Square weld nuts. They got the pilot on them. Obviously, the projections are for if you had a resistance welder, but since we're just going to arc weld it on, just pilot slips pretty much into that plasma cut hole there and you just weld them up. I think if I were to do this again, I'd probably move the footprint out of the weld nuts just to give a better clamping area to keep it from teeter-tottering. Alright, 1/2-inch weld nuts are fully welded on now, and I put her on after she was fully welded just to check distortion. I think I did get a little distortion because it's a lot tighter than when I had it tacked. I mean, it moves around, but you put too much tension on one side, it actually binds up the whole mechanism. So I think what I'll do is I'll just add some grease on this rail. As you can see, it likes to bind up like that. But I mean, as long as you pay attention to what you're doing, I guess, when you're tensioning the track, it should be fine. It's kind of annoying, but it is what it is, I guess, for now. So I got my threaded rod cut. I got them cut at 13 inches right now, which will give me the 1 pitch worth of track throw for the tension assembly, because that's basically all you need. But anyways, I'm going to go ahead and weld these bottom 3/4 inch nuts. I'm just using the threaded rod now as a guide. And then what I'll do is I'll weld these guys on, so that way you can just put a socket on there and tension the track. All installed, and I got my main hex nut welded, and then my weld nut welded on as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add these little legs here. That'll put us at 90 degrees, or normal to the tensioner direction. I'll just use this as a template. I'm not going to do any measuring or anything. And I'll weld these on. And I'll make sure that that little leg, this little leg right here, is as close as possible to the actual pushing force, so that way it doesn't cave in this 1/4 inch piece of steel. But yep, that's what I'll do, and I'll do that for both sides. Alright. The legs have been fully welded on now. As you can see, I mean, it's pretty simple deal. You just turn that screw and the idler moves back. Just gotta make sure you don't turn one side too much, or else you'll bind the other. But yep, and I do have my locking bolts in as well. Next thing I gotta do is I gotta put my lock nut on the actual thread screw, the jack screw. So overall, everything went together pretty well. What I'll do now is I'll install the hubs and bearings, and I'll clean up this spindle here to accept the idlers. Alright, idler hubs are all assembled and greased up, ready to go and ready to accept idlers. Alright, I got the idlers kind of mocked up here. I don't have the lug nuts fully tightened up yet, but everything's good to go from the tensioner side. Got my lock nut clamp bolts right here. I'll probably put some lock nuts on this side too, of the half inchers. Yep, everything's looking pretty good. So that pretty much concludes the idler tensioner assembly.